little bit. So welcome everybody. If you're here to talk about or to hear about radical place leadership on the third sector, you're in the right place. I have 5 fantastic guests. We normally do this with a smaller number, but we thought that this was a really interesting topic and that it was suitable for more of a round table discussion. So we're going to hear lots of different views on this, but the conversation around radical place leadership is gaining momentum, and this is inspired by innovative approaches in Wigan, Gateshead, and other leading localities, and it's all about a new model of collaborative leadership across an entire place. And what it really envisions is breaking down the service silos and refocusing support on the most vulnerable individuals and families. And on the flip side of this, there's also a consensus that this type of collaborative place-based working is the only way towards sustainable local public services, which are under increasing financial strain. But the success of this hinges on the full engagement and empowerment of the local third sector. And they understand the needs of communities they serve much better than anyone. So what I'm going to do is now ask my guests to introduce themselves. So Avril, can I come to you first just to say hello?
Hi, I'm Avril McIntyre, based in Barking and Dagenham, been a charity leader for a long time, and really pleased to be here today.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Avril. Rachel.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rachel Law, Chief Executive of Possibilities, and I deliver social care across the North West and Yorkshire. Thank you.
Brilliant. And Matt.
Hi everyone, I'm Matt Skinner. I'm the Chief Exec at Care City. We're a community interest company also based in Barking and Dagenham. We were actually set up between our kind of local health trust and Barking and Dagenham Council about 10 years ago, and span out as an independent community interest company about 5 years ago to support innovation across health and social care by working with those partners and our community.
Brilliant. And Emily.
Hi everybody, Emily Brooke. I work with Matt at Care City CIC as Director of Innovation, and I'm also a long-time trustee and fan of the BCC sector.
Fantastic, thanks Emily. And then last but certainly not least, Donna.
Thanks, Andrew, and it's brilliant to be here with all these fantastic people. Fantastic team of people you've got on this podcast. So I'm the chair at Possibilities. I work with Rachel, and I'm also a non-exec on the board at Mutual Ventures, and my background is local government, so I was chief exec at Wigan. Cheers.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Donna. And we're doing some exciting work with Donna on this whole concept of radical place leadership, of which this is an important point. Donna, I'm going to come to you first just to express in your own words why this whole idea of place leadership in a different way is important at the minute.
Yeah, thanks very much, Andrew. I think we had a statement from Wes Streeting, didn't we, a couple of weeks ago, where he said that the NHS is broken. And I agree with him. I think it is broken. But I think it's broader than that. I think the entirety of public services are broken and need completely remodelling. So whether it's mental health, social care, adults and children's, primary care, everything about public services needs a complete shift, a complete remodelling. And they need to be turned inside out and back towards communities. I think they've become, particularly over the last 14 years, starved of resources, but much more silo focused. They've become much more focused on key performance indicators that are organisational, not system wide, and that focus on not the person or the community, but focus on the kind of maintaining status quo wrapped around individual organisations. And I don't think that is sustainable, no matter how much money is given through passed on to public services. Their survival depends on a different model, which is rooted in communities, rooted in the voluntary and community sector and social enterprises, and really listens to the people that they serve. I think we've got a real dilemma ahead of us. I think the riots, kind of ongoing riots that we've got at the moment, are a sign that we're not in touch with communities and that sometimes the values that organisations hold dear are not the same ones as are held by community organisations. So we need to have a real think about how we listen, how we understand what's going on within communities, and how we have that dynamic, trusting relationship with the third sector that doesn't occur everywhere. I think there's some great work in Barking and Dagenham, some great work in Wigan and Gateshead, but it's not universal. You know, integrated care systems are an attempt to bring people together around place, but still not working together around person and community. And I think the voluntary and community sector are very much an afterthought in those partnerships. I don't think there's been a real shift of power to the third sector in the way that is needed. So radical place leadership is working with leaders, community leaders and organisational leaders to really rethink how we can get a different model, which is based on starting with the person, starting with the community and the place, and building on the strengths of that place. You know, a real kind of energetic and optimistic vision for the future. Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks, Donna. Really good outline. And just to join is join. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we kick off. This is being recorded, so I will be sharing the recording with everybody who has registered. So you please share that with any colleagues. And then the only other thing to say is that if you would like to put a question to the panel, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So with that, I want to cover 3 key themes. So the first one is, what is place leadership and what is the third sector's role in it? So Donna has articulated her view of it, but I want to get other views, particularly on the third sector role. Then we want to get into talking about how does the public sector currently engage with third sector leaders and organizations on the idea of place leadership. And then the third theme is, how should they engage? So on the first point then, Matt, how do you view place leadership as the leader of a key third sector organization in Barking and Dagenham?
I mean, I'm not sure I can sum it up better than Donna has probably, but I'll attempt to kind of give my take, I guess, on that. But I mean, absolutely support, I guess, that big bit about trust that Donna mentioned. I think a reset around trust is pivotal, I guess, around place leadership for me, because I think often place leadership, and I used to work in a local authority and remember sitting in kind of place partnership meetings, like you think you're kind of tackling big complex problems around a table with really important people from big organizations having their say, but actually it's about understanding what's happening on the ground and enabling more of that to happen and to come through. And that has to start with a kind of a reset in the relationships, but also the trust that's happening at that level in our communities. I guess ultimately though, place leadership for me is about creating the right conditions in a place so that people can really thrive. And it's about, I think, starting with an understanding of those needs at a place level in our communities, which I think, to the point also Donna was making about what's going on currently with the rioting, it has to start with listening to people and making more time to listen and to tell the kind of stories and bring through the lived experience of people who are facing, pretty, in lots of ways, horrific kind of problems in some of our places at the moment, and understanding what's at the root cause of those is really important before we start to come up with solutions to tackle them. For Care City, I guess, it's about working really collaboratively with our community, with other statutory partners. So absolutely, council, health foundation, health trusts, foundations, hospitals, play really critical roles. But I think it's also about working with them to kind of challenge ways of working, experiment differently, try new ways of working to solve those complex problems. And importantly, I think one of the things that we always have to remind ourselves, but I see happen quite a lot, is that need to leave your kind of organizational hat at the front door when you're thinking about those complex problems. So we don't come into conversations about things from one perspective that is just ours. It's about recognizing that lived experience, bringing that through, but then also recognizing the kind of experience and knowledge and skills that other organizations have in order to solve that problem. And actually for us, it doesn't always mean therefore that we're leading a thing, but we could be bringing together a collaboration of people to try and deliver something that adds that value locally. So we're doing a lot of that at the moment around things like our hospital discharge and kind of social isolation work, which I'll let Emily talk to later. But it's really about not us kind of leading a service delivery, but about us working with different voluntary sector organisations to really understand some of the root causes of social isolation, like in our communities, bringing those lived experiences through, and then supporting them through a kind of learning system to test different ways of working, to try different approaches, and be there to kind of come together when things aren't working and try and figure out how we might change tack and do things differently. And the local authorities are around the table, but it's not driving all the decisions. It's not making the kind of processes work. That's being done by us and the other community organisations that we're working with. I guess just I'll also say I think we're in a bit of an envious position at Care City, because in some ways we live between the cracks, I guess, of like health and care and communities. And I think, therefore, for me at least, as a leader of the organisation, I think it's important that we recognise our role in bringing together people to have the right conversation. I think that's really critical in place leadership as well. And that's as much about kind of the stuff I just described, but also about recognising when there's opportunities to kind of bid for funding for our place, when we spot a problem or recognise a local need, and to leverage that in as an organisation that lives in the third sector, can bid for grant funding, etc., to support better outcomes. So I'll stop there, but yeah, hopefully that gives a bit of a flavour of what we do.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you. Just to pick up on something you said towards the end there about living between the cracks, as you say. I mean, that you've presented that as making that a positive thing, but actually quite a lot of the third sector organizations end up filling in the gaps where there's not proper provision, and that's a challenge as well, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I mean, one of the things that, because I used to, before working at Care City, I worked in a big kind of private limited organization, and I think one of the things that I've really kind of recognised in talking to other voluntary community sector organisations is the fact that a lot of our organisations often mirror some of the bad behaviours of the public sector. So commissioning, for example, at the moment, like organisations are having to compete for funding, and therefore that thing I was talking about in terms of not leaving your hat at the front door when talking about kind of problems locally really comes out, because organisations are kind of not sharing information, they're not sharing data, they're not sharing insight. And I think that's exactly to your point, Andrew, because for too long, actually, a lot of those organisations have had to be firefighting, struggling to kind of find the next bit of money to pay for the next thing, and not being able to think differently about the outcomes at place as well. So there's a real challenge there.
Thank you very much. Avril, can I bring you in on this question of what the role of the third sector is in place leadership?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the back of what Matt said, our experience in Barking and Dagenham. So over the last 5 years, we've developed a thing called the Barking and Dagenham Collective, which is about bringing the third sector around the table as an equal partner. And it was interesting because initially it was with our statutory partners recognising the role of the voluntary sector and the importance. But as time has gone on, once you have people around the seat, it's been really interesting to see that the third sector themselves start to then like, okay, so now we have the answer. And I think it's like that thing Matt said, the thing we've been exploring is how do we leave our hats at the table to come together to find solutions? And it is a place, not a sector. And how do we come together as sectors, recognising that none of us have the answers? And one of the things, particularly over the last year, that's been the biggest challenge, and I think particularly to the third sector locally, is bringing residents around the table as well. Not in some token kind of, well, let's have a lived experience group that we kind of pat them on the head, but genuinely around residents to design how things are done. And it's just a fascinating journey in terms of that place leadership, which is about what are we trying to get to? And that is a solution, particularly in Barking and Dagenham, we hear every index of disadvantage and deprivation. It's a stubborn issues that have been here for a very long time. We are doing something wrong because nothing's really changing. So how do we come together to actually change it? And when we do that, it's fascinating what changes. But the leadership in that is those who will say, it's not my answer and my organisation, but how do we explore together? And that takes bold leadership.
Yeah. I think that's a challenge to the concept of the hero leader, isn't it? That it has to be my idea, my organization's idea. Avril, I want to just go immediately to a question which has come in here, which is from Boo Dendy, who's from Leading Lives and a good friend of Mutual Ventures. Are local authorities in the NHS fully invested in co-production being the driver for change? What's your experience?
I would say it was interesting because during COVID, everybody changed, didn't they? And every local authority had to look to everybody else as well. But in Bark and the Dagenham, interestingly, they didn't go back in the way that some local authorities did. They actually took some bold steps to say, let's keep producing because something's happened. So we have seen, I would say, some very bold and interesting routes through to open up things, both from the local authority and from health. There's always challenges, it's ongoing, but I would say locally we have seen and willingness to genuinely co-design things together. And where that's happened, we've seen some really interesting innovation.
That's really good. That's really encouraging to hear. So just before I move on from this theme, I just want to see if anybody else on the panel has any thoughts on this, because I think there's a real strength that the third sector has around properly understanding the needs and being able to engage with communities and really listen to people, because we're doing some work, Donna and I, in a number of council areas, and identifying what the real challenges in a community or a neighborhood is quite challenging, because the data, which is what the officials might rely on, will tell you part of the story, but actually the community groups can tell you exactly what's going on. And what's become really clear to me, who am newer to this kind of concept than all of you, is just the importance of that community knowledge being overlaid with whatever the data is saying. I wonder if anybody wants to say anything on the importance of that. Emily.
Go on then. I mean, what a group of people to be in a room in with to talk about this challenge. And this challenge is what is probably kind of one of the great loves of my life, really, trying to think about different ways of doing these things. And I think there's just something to be said for these place-based partnerships, which I've been part of with a local government hat and an NHS hat in my time. I'm now kind of on the edges of those with a VCSE sector hat. Thinking about this concept of creating conditions instead of and I get it. When you're very senior and you're drawing a high salary, there's a huge amount of pressure on you when you're in a meeting to think, I need to be able to provide an answer to this question. I'm the expert. I'm getting paid the big bucks. It's really brave to sit there and say, we can't fix this in this room. We need to find a different way to give this complex question the respect and the time that it deserves, and to get the right voices around that. And I think that takes you into a conversation about how you create that capacity. That becomes a commissioning conversation quite quickly. And I think there's something in common between the sort of work that we do in terms of, and by we, I'm talking about, like, we work hand in glove with Avril's team in the BD Collective, and I can talk about that later a bit more. To give a practical example, we work very closely with all sorts of other VCSE sector organisations as well. So that kind of capacity we have to say, we don't know all the answers to this, but we can sure as heck create the conditions to figure it out, and to test and to build evidence, and to listen to people properly, deeply over time. And also, going back to what you were saying, Andrew, about these kind of the cracks between the system, of a kind of lack of provision that responds to, that feels carved out around place, that feels carved out in a deeply personalised way. I think VCSE sector providers like Rachel can be magical in that space. Like, the two by a streak ahead, the two best providers of services that I've seen up close in my life happen to both be in the VCSE sector, but I don't think that's a coincidence. I think we need to get away from this kind of feeling that you only commission VCSE sector provision when it's cheaper or because the public sector has failed to do something. Frankly, I think in a lot of cases, these providers just have a whole different refocusing of issues, and they will work directly to people. They will create around their place. But I'm not going to say any more because I think Rachel's got magical stories to share on this.
Well,
So
I
hoping
will,
team her up.
thanks, Emily. I will come to Rachel in this next bit, which I'm going to move on to now, which is about how does the public sector currently engage with the third sector on place leadership. But before I come to Rachel, Don, I wonder if you could just say a little bit about how Wigan Council engaged with the third sector as part of the Wigan deal.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. We learned a lot about what we've been doing wrong over decades, really. So there's a fantastic lady, Barbara Nettleton, brilliant woman. She was running a community centre called Sunshine House right in the heart of schools in Wigan. And what she said was, just stop coming in when you've got money, asking us for our ideas, taking our ideas, giving us little dribs and drabs of money, micromanaging us to within an inch of our lives, and then going away when the money disappears. Just bloody stop it. Absolutely inspirational force of nature, Barbara. And we thought, yeah, we're doing it all wrong. So we shifted the relationship. We created this community investment fund, which is a case study in the recent Demos report on liberated public services. And it really was a brilliant pot of money it wasn't commissioned top down. It was very much asking the VCSE and community organisations that weren't registered with anyone, neighbours, what is needed in your local area. It was 12 million initially, and we basically we used council reserves to fund it and created this transformation fund to resource it. And the ideas that came from the VCSE were the best. We had no idea that these ideas were going to be so rich and incredible. And I think it's that pot of money and the belief in the sector to make change, and not this micromanaging, this trust, this element, as Matt said before, and Avril said, we don't trust the sector. The statutory sector doesn't trust the voluntary and community sector, really. They think they're not professional. They think they're going to run away with the money, and they think that you can't really tangibly measure the impact. They'd rather build a new centre and fill it with professionals rather than investing in people who live in the area, who've got that local knowledge, who've got that trusted relationship with communities. So at the end of the first 7 years of the deal, we'd managed to add an additional 7 years of healthy life expectancy in the most deprived wards. So that's the difference between becoming seriously ill at 50 and becoming seriously ill at 57. And that was the tangible difference that we made by creating this resource. And people came up with amazing ideas. So like men's walking football, brilliant projects to tackle mental health. Wigan's a big rugby town, so loads around sport and rugby memories, which was
the rugby memories group was really good.
Yeah. So all sorts of things that were really rooted in the community. The ideas came from the community, and we believed in them, we trusted them, we invested in them. And Barbara sent me a little video a few years before she sadly died of her running around Sunshine House with a cheque that we'd sent her for 140 grand. And she went, and I said, and there's no monitoring, Barbara, just get on with doing what you said you were going to do. And she was like, yes, this is the deal. But it was by listening to people like that, leaders in the third sector who were confident enough to challenge what was a really rubbish system that we had before. And we gave away some community assets as well as part of it.
So just this links to a question that's come through from Joanne Lancaster about how does the third sector build confidence with risk-averse agencies such as health trusts and councils. So you've just hinted at a couple of things there, Donna, but just really quickly, what advice would you give to third sector leaders to do that?
I think third sector leaders know, people like Avril and Rachel, they know, they're very skilled in how to do this, I think, and they survived for years doing it. And it's not, sometimes it's like, even within a single council, you've got 20 different people to convince. It's not, we don't make it easy for the sector, and we don't have that same level of trust. So, and in the NHS, I think it's actually even worse, having been a chair of a foundation trust. I think the levels of trust there are so low. They would create in these integrated care systems a whole raft of senior roles. So, the chief exec paid £250,000 a year of a integrated care system, and a whole management team paid not much less. But you try to get a community worker into one of the patches, you try to get them to fund somebody to do health outreach as a community midwife. No way. Show me the evidence. Show me that it's going to work. So I do honestly think people need to listen to the sector, because they do have the answers. They've been doing it for years. They know communities much better than statutory organisations. And as Matt said before, they can join the dots. They live in the cracks. They join the dots where we don't.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. Rachel, I'm really eager to get you in here. Possibilities, you introduced Possibilities earlier. It's an organization that is deeply rooted in the communities that it serves. You run community events. It is, I mean, you're always putting on social media how community is really engaging with Possibilities as an organization. Would you say that you play an unofficial place leadership role, filling in the gaps or the cracks, like Matt and I were talking about earlier, like so many third sector organizations, or is it more formalized?
Well, I'd like to say we've got a formal approach, Andrew, but we don't. It's really very unofficial. So I think the only official thing that we say is that we'd like to make a difference in the places and the communities where we work, and we recognise that the communities are really diverse with a unique set of sort of attributes. So I guess I just want to give you some examples of what we've done, really. So we recognised a few years ago that there was a lack of accommodation for people with learning disabilities, front door accommodation. Housing was a real issue. So we thought that we would build some apartments, front door apartments for people with learning disabilities to meet that need. We've never built anything before. We had no money and we had no land, but that didn't stop us. We approached the council, got an asset transfer for some land, and got a loan through the Public Works Loan Board, and we built 17 apartments which are full, and we've got a waiting list for people to move in. So we are looking at building some more. Our head office, there's a wellbeing garden. We have a wellbeing garden, a farm, and a community cafe, and that's all open to the community. And we invite people in, and providers often say that, they're part of the community, but they're not. They've got a place in the community. We really open our doors to the whole community so we can understand, what some of their sort of issues are. Our wellbeing garden and farm, and we've got a TP as well. We've got connections with GPs and social prescribers, and we make our space available for those people that want to come and do some social prescribing or have some Reiki. We offer that. We also have looked at some of the health inequalities in our communities. We know people need to exercise and get moving, so we thought we'd get 7 apes around 7 foot and put them all around Haywood. We arranged a 3-mile walk for the whole community where people could go see these arts, which were decorated by local schools, do a brush rubbing when they'd done the whole trail, and then we put a huge event on in the summer for the whole community. And really, I suppose community cohesion's particularly important, especially given the current situation, communities becoming accepting of one another. And I think one of the final things is, we recognise that social care staff are quite low paid, and we want to try and help those people that work for us that have got families. So we've put something on called Cherwell Chipmunks, where the families can drop the children off at Cherwell, and they can spend a day working on the farm and in the wellbeing garden, which is always really popular. But you know, it's taught acceptance between children and people with learning disabilities. And you know, some of the things that you hear is, you know, some of the children saying, you know, there is no difference between someone with a learning disability and ourselves. We all want the same things. And I guess for me, if I've ever done something really positive that's might made a difference, it's that, you know, children are our future, and having that acceptance is really important.
Amazing. Thanks, Rachel. That's really inspiring, and it is a very inspiring place, Cherwell, for sure. Emily, can I bring you in on this question just to talk a little bit about what you're doing in Care City?
You can, Andrew, and I'd highly recommend a visit to Cherwell for anybody in the region. Matt and I spent an afternoon there a few months ago with Rachel, and Rachel's only scratching the surface because she's like very modest as well. There is all sorts going on at that place. It's one of the most joyful afternoons I've ever had. So high plug there. At Care City, so an example of a way of doing, and it's not kind of like the only way, it's not kind of our way or anything like that, but a way that we're trying to do something differently at the moment is the hospital discharge social isolation work that Matt kind of referenced earlier. The best part of it, about 10 months ago now, our place knew that it had a problem with people being really isolated, and that was acutely seen when people come out of hospital, when they have this big health event in their life, and even though they've got access to healthcare systems after that, the 95% of support that most of us would want at that time would come from our friends, family, community, the people you're close to, the people that you trust when you're at your most physically or mentally vulnerable, and when you're really lacking in confidence. And we were lucky in our place that this wasn't attempted to be solved in a group of in a meeting room somewhere behind closed doors. They commissioned an approach to looking at this that was designed from the start to be framed around people's stories, to be based in learning at every step of what we're doing, and that was designed to create the conditions for people to work together differently. So the way that's looked over that time is that me and Avril's colleague Elspeth, who is absolutely kind of my double act in this, and our teams, we've started through kind of hearing the stories of people who are in that kind of isolated place, sometimes over 10-15 years of them sitting on waiting lists, and then finally getting to the front of that waiting list and realizing that they don't have a good relationship with that clinician, and ending up back on another waiting list of people who are really desperate for help. And it always astounds me in a world where it feels hard for most of us to get to services, like how hard people will try and how much they want to find support when they're in that place. That's a huge amount of emotional and kind of time-consuming effort for them. So we heard, and we worked with another not-for-profit. There's been up to 7 not-for-profits involved directly in this piece of work at different points so far, to kind of beautifully illustrate out those stories. Then we brought people together, instead of kind of like dragging people in the room to tell their stories, we had these visual stories so people could, as close as you can, without kind of making people sit there all the time in your space, could get to know a person and work around that person's story and identify ways in which things could have been done differently. So we didn't start from a place of going, design a new service. We started from a place of these are kind of 10-15 stories. how things have looked different, and it got people outside of that organisational lens really quickly, and it got them talking about things like, I might be worried that my cat wouldn't get fed if I broke my legs tomorrow, which you don't normally hear in these stories about in kind of service design spaces traditionally.
Yeah.
From that, we are now working with 3 delivery partners, so VCSE sector delivery partners, in addition to us and Elspeth's organisation from within the BD Collective, and they are completely different delivery partners. We've got kind of bigger, more traditional organisations. We've got a small organisation called Humorist, who are very arts-based. They're run by a wonderful stand-up comic called Susie, who keeps us all very entertained and keeps our spirits up beautifully. So we're embracing their different ways of working, their different ways of approaching this challenge. We've taken huge inspiration from places like Wigan and Gateshead that you mentioned in your opening comments, Andrew, about how we do this, how we work with people, how we listen to people, about the fact that everything we're doing is bespoke by default. Everything that we're doing is about building those relationships and really getting to know people, and not just working to the fact that they're isolated and saying, have you thought of joining a book club or whatever, working to all of the factors in their life that have led them to a place where they feel like they've built a cocoon around themselves for a position of safety. And helping them out of that over time in whatever way that looks like to them. And it's fascinating. It's the different approach that you get. And we've got weekly learning sessions where we're all coming together and building a culture around sharing openly when we really mess things up, and when we don't know the answers across organisational boundaries. It's an entirely different way of working. It's a cheaper way of working than having these people sitting on waiting lists for years and turning up all different sorts of services and not getting what they need. And it also feels really pleasurable. It feels good for the people we're working with, and it feels good for us as well. So that's an example. But
No, really good, Emily. Thank you very much. That is equally inspiring. So thanks. I want to get on to the third theme now, which is the exciting one about how things should be done. So Avril, I want to come to you first, and then I want to bring Matt in. But how should key third sector organizations be involved in governance, key decision-making bodies? In an ideal world, what would it look like, and how can we make it happen? Avril, I'll give you that really easy question to answer.
I think well, goodness knows an ideal world. I think the thing that has been an interesting exploration for us here, and the lessons we've learned in that, is when the collective started 5 years ago. So it was through the social infrastructure contract with the council, so to coordinate the social sector. And right from the beginning, we said, we are not going to turn up at your boards and committees in a tokenistic way of one person representing the sector. We will have some representation, but what we prefer is to give you, your officers, scope to come and meet with 40 organisations rather than one goes to your meetings. And interestingly, at that time particularly, there was a real appetite, but we had to provide the opportunities. We had to have the 40 organisations working with young people or whatever. And that changed the conversation. And I think at the time, not in a kind of arsey way, but in a kind of helpful way, we kind of pushed back with some of the ways particularly the council at the time, connected with the sector. And once we'd built that trust, what we've actually been commissioned about £2.5 million of different contracts and funding, because we have the conversation with the sector. So the council were willing to engage the collective, and then we developed the consortium from that, rather than the council needing these individual relationships where they are monitoring. And also that meant smaller organisations could be involved, because we took the pressure, the lead organisation took the pressure of the monitoring and all that check-in. So I think in an ideal world, we've talked about trust a lot, but I think to try and have a trust with 400 organisations and tiny little organisations trying to engage with the council, it's just not realistic. People don't have time. So there's something about a brokerage for the sector, which can be a trusted brokerage that then does really creative things. And so we kind of equipped and developed people to be representing in some of the boards and committees, because that's helpful too. But our responsibility was to get the sector ready for that meeting together. And then the council, and now actually health, I mean, they pay us to go to meetings. It's a completely, all those things are just now an accepted way of being. And it's just been fascinating. But
Yeah.
we had to develop a brokerage. And I do wonder if that is part of the future, where there's a really effective brokerage conversation that can happen, where then we meet in the middle, but it's not one or the other. And then it's about how do we commission decent sized contracts, a bit like Donna was saying, which of course does need to have accountability, but we don't expect a organisation of £50,000 to have a contract with the council. I just think it's just overwhelming. I've done it and it's overwhelming. Let them be part of a 500,000, a million contract, and build and grow capacity that way. So we've, on both sides, there's creativity that is needed, as we recognise we need everyone to be part of the change. Does that make sense?
It makes huge. I love the idea of a brokerage. I mean, I've sat, I'm sure we all have, in a lot of meetings where there is, health and care partnerships at the place level, and are a great example where there's a sole representative of the third sector who's there, wondering why they're there. Even wondering even more why they're there than the council sometimes, who is also sometimes wondering why they're there, gate crashing an NHS meeting. But I think that's a brilliant point. Matt, can I bring you in just to get your thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, I mean, I can't answer it better than Avril probably. Like, I guess just a reflection, I guess, in terms of, I think, the role that Avril's organisation plays, which I think in other areas you would look at them and you'd look to someone like the CVS to kind of be thinking about how to do it. But I think actually a lot of the principles in the BD Collective are around those kind of collaborative networking, relationship building. It feels like kind of trying to build movements around that. And I think it feels really different. So yeah, like I think everything that Avril says, I agree with. Well, I mean, I'll just give a slightly different take, I guess, because one of the things that I saw in the questions was around data, and we're really lucky, and I have inherited this as at Care City, but we've got a kind of linked data set that we are the custodians of, I guess, which has residence data in Barking Dagenham down to a kind of individual household level. And we've got health data like down to GP level as well in this, and it's a database that's kind of stored securely and in the cloud, and I won't go into all of that, but don't worry, it's all secure. But the fascinating thing about this is that so we've got a community board, and to that co-production question and comment earlier, I guess, like our community board, they're not a board that is part of our formal governance, I guess, in the way that they like make decisions about the company, but they're really involved in kind of shaping our work and like coming out and doing research with us and challenging the work. But actually they also play a role around that data. So as residents of Barking Dagenham, our community board kind of hold the keys to the use of that data, because it's about them and our population. And so as the custodians of that data, like we regularly get approached to kind of have access to the data to support local research around innovation in terms of social care and health. But during COVID, we had data about vaccination uptake, for example, and in different bits of population, like how that in the past had worked and what hadn't worked. And so we were approached by the council and worked with our community board to look at that opportunity, I guess, to look at previous data trends around vaccination uptake and then drive new campaigns locally where we thought the COVID vaccine might be lower in terms of uptake because of previous history. But like just this amazing kind of data set that allows us to kind of work differently with the community, but they really own it. Like we're kind of keepers of it from an organizational perspective. It's not our data, it's theirs. And I guess there's something in like how you think about data differently in this as well, because I think that informs a lot of the decision making that we need to be making if we're going to tackle some of these problems. So yeah, just a slightly different take on the question, I guess, from that perspective.
Fantastic. Thanks, Matt. And thank you for picking up on the data point. I'm going to try and get through some of the questions now. Donna, would you like to come in? But while you're coming in, I know the idea of one of the questions here is about, data and evaluation. And I know that's something you're pretty hot on. So just make the point you were going to make, and then if you could just say something about that as well, that would be great.
Yeah, no problem. There's someone on this call who is absolutely incredible. I don't know if you've met him. He'll be really embarrassed. He's very humble, like Rachel. Chris Dabbs.
I've got Chris's question here that I'm
Chris
going
is
to read out.
amazing. So
Yeah.
Chris has done some brilliant work across Greater Manchester over the years, hasn't he, Rachel? And you know, I've learned a lot from him. I think I first met him about 30 years ago when we both worked in Salford, and he's done some incredible work with communities over the years. Passionate advocate of shifting cultures in public sector organisations, and really effectively does it, but very gently. So I honestly think someone like Chris or his team, he does some work. Elephants Trail, Google it if you haven't seen it. Greater Manchester Elephants Trail, first class. Some of the best kind of ethnographic local work with local citizens I've ever seen. But why don't we ask, rather than, as you asked me earlier on, Andrew, what advice would I give to VCSE leaders? What advice would VCSE leaders give to public service leaders, I think, is the question we need to be asking. How can we get VCSE to be that conduit between community, as Avril's really well explained, to bring about really deep culture change within organisations? Because very often people running organisations don't realise how crap they are when it comes to person focus. They just don't.
Very few people realize how crap they are, including me, probably.
No, that's
it's not a human strength.
But you know what I mean? They don't realize, just from a customer, from a citizen point of view, the impact of what they do. So whether it's a job centre or a hospital or a council, customer service centre or social care, they don't realize that they're just silo focused. Key performance indicator. They're not bothered about people and communities, and they're like almost like, oh yeah, we didn't think they had a whole wider family. We didn't think they had a cat. You know, as Emily said, we didn't think they had a life.
Yeah.
We're just delivering our service. That's our job, is to transact rather than have a different relationship, a completely different social contract and different relationship with citizens. And I think we can learn a lot from people like Chris and the other leaders on this call. And that's what it should be like. Open-minded leaders who do that, who bring people in to shift cultures.
Yeah. And Donna, just really, really briefly on the kind of importance of demonstrating impact.
Yeah, I think on data, I think we don't use data well enough across systems to demonstrate impact. I think we transact with people, we keep that data separately within organisations. We don't gather the, as people call it, softer intelligence, but I think it's the really important intelligence that communities hold about people who need support. So we found out in Wigan, we had, on a small street, we had 22 different social workers, all working differently with families. None of them thinking about community at all transacting. This is the kind of way that we need to think differently about intelligence, data gathering, sharing, risk stratifying, people who need support, but bringing in that intelligence that community groups have to bolster that, so we can give targeted early intervention, prevention and support together, rather than the council doing it and then the VCSE coming in picking up the pieces when they've done it wrong. You know, let's have a joint effort to do it properly.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm just going to come to Chris's question here. So Chris Dabbs, Donna mentioned Chris. Chris is the chief executive of an organization called Unlimited Potential, which is well worth a look if you would like to. Chris's question is essentially, not all solutions lie in the statutory and VCSE sector. What about local independent businesses playing more of a role, taking, I guess what Chris is saying, taking more responsibility for their communities, and outlets such as milk delivery, hairdressers, chip shops, convenience stores. Who would like to say something on that? Rachel, I know that you engage with, sorry, Avril, I will come to you as well. I'll let Avril go first, but Rachel, I'm going to come to you as well, because I know Possibilities engages with local businesses. Avril.
I think it's a really, really key point, and it's one I completely forgot about in the past, but we're working in a little area in Dagenham called Andrew's Corner, which has got a whole range of different things. The laundrette, the optician, the flower shop. It has been incredible here what they do for and in their community. And as we connected people up, like the guy in the laundrette said, oh, I have loads of people in here that are in temporary housing because they don't have a washing machine, those things. if I knew these things were happening there, so he's now like sees himself as part of the system in terms of, and he's put a kettle in the laundrette because he said, well, maybe it'd be quite helpful if we just sat down for a cup of tea. And the florist, she supports people that she says somebody will come in and I just know they haven't got money for the funeral and I just work it differently. And so I think we forget about these rich resources in our communities, and it's been fascinating working together in this small area with the shops and that as well.
Thank you very much, Avril. Rachel.
I mean, I couldn't really say it better than Avril. She's stolen the things that I would say. So absolutely, we engage with, you know, shops and businesses within the local community. We get them to understand some of the needs, especially the people we support. You know, we've had people coming in saying, you know, we understand that you know, some of the people with learning disabilities need some exercise. So we've set up boxing clubs. We're doing rugby with a local rugby club. So, you know, they really do all have a place. And, you know, if you engage with businesses, they often have so many thoughts, like Avril said, you know, oh, I'll just do this, tweak this small thing. And, you know, they're really seen as part of somebody's community circle. So, yeah.
I mean, Rachel, didn't you rescue a local pony club or a local stables? Like,
yeah, so
modest, you know.
I got a text message about 9:30 one night and said off a friend and said, oh, Rachel, you need to rescue a riding centre for people with learning disabilities. They've got 2 months or something to buy the centre. So I was like, all right. So I messaged my business and development manager at 10 o'clock and said, right, tomorrow we're going to see this riding centre. So to cut a long story short, it is an amazing place. It's a riding centre for people with learning disabilities and also the public. So we did the unthinkable, really. We managed to rescue it. So we got some funding through Levelling Up, and it's Margaret Hayes, shout out for them, they are brilliant. And they managed to buy the centre when we managed to save it. Now, I actually don't have any business in Bury, but actually it was the right, you know, I did, just because I had no business in Bury doesn't mean to say that I shouldn't be, you know, supporting a different community for centre, really, which is absolutely fabulous for the community that it serves in.
And it's kind of like it's very much building on Chris's point and what Avril was saying. There are some really good social enterprises that we all know out there who have bought things like garden centres and, you know, and you actually become part of the community and bring local business in that way as well. Donna.
Yeah, it's just a comment about some of the work we did in Wigan, the Platt Bridge pilot for place-based, integrated place-based working and the link with local businesses. So we had an asset-based approach and there wasn't a lot of assets in Platt Bridge. And one of them was McDonald's. You might not think that's from a public health perspective, a very good asset, but the person who ran it, the franchisee, was been in the looked after child system. He was passionate about young people and giving people opportunities. So he set up with his staff a community football team and netball team on the AstroTurf pitch next to them. You know, he did loads in the local community. There was a Betfred where lots of people with dementia were going in to bet every day. If they didn't come in, Betfred would be one of the people who would notice it first. So I think and the pie shop, of course, it's Wigan. You know, the assets in the community are sometimes the local small businesses and franchises, and we've got to see them as that, not in a negative way, I think.
Really good, Donna, thank you. And I just want to get one more question in here. So there's one from Alan Webb, which is really about a feeling that in the public sector, there's a culture that they have to own the solution to everything. And I think we're really starting to not just go to VCSE sector now, but you know, private sector businesses as well. I mean, Emily, what would you say about that? How do you work with local partners in the statutory sector to try and encourage the letting go of ownership and responsibility for things?
I was just having a look at the question. I love that phrase that Alan's used of rubbing out the lines.
Yes, I should have said that.
And no, it's just a very beautiful kind of phrase, isn't it? That makes you think about what it can feel like sometimes. I think that there needs to be just a frankness in our conversation. I mean, hey, I've been a fan of Donna for a long time, but I think part of the reason that she connects with so many people is that she really does say it how it is. And I hazard a guess from conversations we've had about her time at Wigan as well, that sometimes you need to get in a room and just say, look, this just isn't working. And we need to all be a lot braver, whether we are in local government, we are in the NHS, we're in businesses, we're in local VCSE providers, about constructively saying, like, this isn't working and we are absolutely willing to help fix it. But this way of doing things, where we sit in meeting rooms and panic solutionize, I don't think that's a word, but kind of isn't giving our communities the respect that actually they deserve. So I guess the way that we work with people to try and do that is to come up with different ways to tell. We always start in nearly all of our work starts with telling a person's story with them, and giving them the space to tell their story, and then we're thinking incrementally from that about, okay, what have we learned from that? Who might we need to get into the room to think about this differently? What might that look like? What conditions might we need to create? What might that mean for how we use money? But we kind of flip problems on their heads. Instead of going, right, we've got a problem with loneliness, let's commission a loneliness contract, stick a load of KPIs on it, appoint a provider, which will almost certainly be a big provider, because small providers, like we've all alluded to, probably don't want to be, or don't feel confident enough. Sometimes some of the best providers don't feel confident enough to bid for government, for local government work. Like, just flip that whole way of doing things around, and commission for something, or start exploring something strategically when you're developing your place-based plans, by saying, okay, how do we, the data's got us as far as understanding that there is a problem. Who do we need to talk to and spend time with to understand what that problem feels like and how it could feel differently?
Fantastic, Emily. Thank you very much. Great thought to end on there. So just a big thank you from me to Donna, Matt, Emily, Avril, Rachel. Thank you to everybody who everybody hung around. Actually, nobody left halfway through. That's a good sign. I will send out the recording to everybody who registered. I will also send out the contact or the website information for each of the organizations involved. I recommend you take a look at all of them. So thank you very much, everybody. I really enjoyed that.